Hi, my name is Elizabeth Brown, and I'd like to tell you today a little bit about my story and my journey with PTSD. For those of you who don't know what PTSD is, it's actually post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what the letters stand for. It's a psychological disorder caused by a traumatic event or events. There's four main categories of symptoms. One of them is re-experiencing. You can't stop remembering the event or events. This could be, memories that won't stop, or nightmares or flashbacks. Another one is avoidance. This is where you avoid talking about the event or thinking about the event, or you might avoid people or places or things that remind you of the event. The third one is hyperarousal. This is about being on edge, anxious, having trouble sleeping or concentrating. It's basically like your body is in fight or flight mode all the time. You're just way strung out. The fourth one is negative changes in emotions or beliefs. I think for different people, these emotions are different. It could be hopelessness, you could feel guilty, angry, or frightened, but ultimately it has a huge impact on how you feel about the future, how you feel about your life, and it makes you feel crappy. Another thing that's really important to know about PTSD is that it's not permanent. There are multiple treatments available with a good rate of success. You do not have to live with PTSD for the rest of your life. I've had PTSD since I was a little kid. I was bullied a lot in school, out of school, at home, pretty much from all sides as a very young child. And I started feeling very bad very early. I remember wondering what was the point of life and wanting to die as young as 8 years old. And it didn't occur to me that the bullying was the problem. I think because I was so used to it. It was happening everywhere. It was happening in my house, and it didn't occur to me that maybe I was feeling bad because everyone was picking on me. The conclusion I eventually came to, and I think this is a pretty reasonable conclusion for a young child to come to when they're getting it from all sides, is that there was something wrong with me, that I was unlikable or bad, or that, in some way. And I began to dislike myself. In elementary school, I started having trouble sleeping because I couldn't stop going over and over all the bad things that had happened to me that day, that week, 2 years ago. It was like I couldn't shut my brain off, and I was reliving these events over and over and over again every night. And I remember telling my mother that I couldn't sleep, but I never mentioned to her why I couldn't sleep. Again, I don't think that I knew that this was weird. I didn't understand that this shouldn't be happening to me. I was a little kid. So, I remember having PTSD symptoms late elementary school, at least. And I did, it started to become evident that I was having coping issues. I started acting out a little bit in school. My grades dropped. I was very unhappy. And no one could figure out what was wrong with me. And I didn't know how to express what was wrong with me. I'd never heard of PTSD, obviously. And I think most importantly, I didn't know what was unusual. I was too young to understand that this is not normal. It's not normal to constantly relive events over and over and over again. It's not normal to be afraid and feel threatened 24 hours a day. It's not normal to see no hope and no future in your life when you're 8 years old. I didn't want to grow up. I had absolutely no interest in my future. I didn't want to live. The future stretched on before me as just this long, black tunnel of misery, and I didn't know anything else. I just wish at that time that we had known a little bit more about mental illness in general, and a little bit more about PTSD at that time. It actually took me a very long time to be diagnosed with PTSD. I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder in high school, and I was told at that time that I would never get over having bipolar disorder, that I would have it for the rest of my life, and that I would probably have to take pills for the rest of my life. And I was prescribed a lot of psychotropic medication. I think that first year after I was diagnosed, I was taking 14 pills a day. And that went on for quite a long time. Through the end of high school into college, I took drugs that made it so that I would sleep for 20 hours a day and I couldn't wake up. I took drugs that were addictive, and I was not told by my psychiatrist that they were addictive. And when my parents' insurance stopped covering me, I ended up running out of some of those pills and went through severe withdrawal symptoms. I almost had to go to the hospital. And I took drugs that made me hallucinate, and have given me ongoing, possibly permanent visual side effects. I've been off those drugs for over 5 years, and I still can't see straight. So it was really unpleasant. And I never felt better because I didn't have bipolar disorder. I understand that some people do, and that they should take their medicine, and for many people, medication is a godsend. But for those of us who are misdiagnosed, and there are a lot of us, it's incredibly frustrating and disappointing. And they kept changing my meds and giving me more meds, and it got to the point where I was asking my psychiatrist to please dial down the doses a little bit, because I was so drugged up and so out of it. And I remember one visit where I specifically asked to have a lower dose of a couple of my medications, and my psychiatrist looked at me and said, no, I think we're going to double it, and I'm going to give you another drug. So that was primarily my experience with psychiatry, was, no, I think we're going to give you more drugs. We're going to make you feel even more doped up. Finally, I did end up moving, and I got a new doctor, and they said, oh, no, you don't have bipolar disorder at all. I don't know who had this idea. This is crazy. This is totally wrong. You've never had bipolar disorder. And that was kind of a shock, because I'd spent 5 years thinking that, that had become my identity. But we weaned me off the meds, and that was awesome. And I started to feel normal again, and that was great, but they still had no idea what was wrong with me. They told me I might have a personality disorder. It was kind of an accident that I ended up going to a school counselor last year, because I'd had a panic attack in the middle of class. My teacher had mentioned something that reminded me of something traumatic that had happened to me, and I was very upset, and I was afraid to go back to class. I was shaking, my heart was pounding, and I was just terrified of going back to class. And so I did see a counselor for that, and I started describing some of what I'd been experiencing lately, and they said, oh, well, that sounds like PTSD. I mean, has anyone ever mentioned this to you before? Have you ever been diagnosed with PTSD? And I was like, no, no one ever even suggested it. It's and I had heard of PTSD, and I knew some people with it, war vets, primarily, and it had never occurred to me that I might also have it. I didn't think that happened. I'd never lived through an earthquake. I'd never been in combat. It just never occurred to me. But once I started reading about PTSD and really looking into it, I found that it really did fit. I mean, I had all the symptoms. Here I am reliving all this traumatic stuff over and over and over again. And I'm on edge, and I'm scared, and I don't know why. I'm very angry for no reason, especially when somebody does something that reminds me of something that happened in the past. And I get scared and very angry, and I feel like I'm out of control and like I have to defend myself. And looking back then at that situation, I'm always like, well, what was I in danger from? Like, there's nothing. I was totally being irrational, but I couldn't seem to help it. This switch would go off, and I'd be terrified, and I'd be angry, and I felt like a caged animal. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that I'd been like this my whole life, that I've been reliving traumatic experiences my whole life, every night. And I never thought to mention it to my therapist. I talked about how sad I felt and how angry I felt and how I couldn't sleep at night, but I never mentioned the fact that I was reliving all these experiences over and over again. And I mentioned that I was anxious and afraid, but I don't think that I conveyed well the idea of hyperarousal, which is a symptom of PTSD, where you're on edge all the time. I didn't know the right words to say because I didn't have enough information, I think. And I blame the psychiatrists for being so ignorant and for pumping me full of pills, but honestly, I have always taken full responsibility for my own treatment. And looking back, the thing that I am most sorry about is that I did not have the right information available to me, that somebody didn't tell me, that I didn't know. And that's what I'm now hoping to do for somebody else. I'm about to go through treatment for PTSD. For the first time in my life, I have the right diagnosis. For the first time in my life, there is hope that I don't have to have this for the rest of my life. I can be free of PTSD. I'm not going to have it for the rest of my life. I can work through this. I can be healed. I can be normal, sort of. And I've decided to record my experience of going through treatment, which I've just started, because I'm hoping that someone else out there will not go through everything that I went through prior to being properly diagnosed. I'm hoping that someone else realizes, hey, I could have PTSD too, and gets the help that they need. I know that this might encourage people who are looking for an answer or for an excuse and who don't have PTSD to kind of latch onto that, and I'm not encouraging that, but I am saying that honestly take a look at what's going on and really try to get the correct diagnosis and take responsibility for what you're going through. And anybody out there who is thinking, oh yeah, that sounds a lot like me, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And we can make it through this together.